the feminine rising is really an awakening of these parts of the intuition, of the feminine wisdom, of the wisdom that our bodies have.
Today's guest is Natalie, who is a women's empowerment coach and a leader of the feminine rising. She supports women to overcome mindset blocks and get into alignment with their soul. And she is also the host of the Feminine Frequency podcast, which has over 100,000 downloads and empowers women from all over the world. Now, in this episode, we dive into the feminine rising. Like, really, what does it mean? How is it impacting our lives and the collective? And what is it asking of us? What does it require from us? So we go into healthy and unhealthy feminine traits, blocks that so many women encounter when wanting to allow our inner feminine to rise, how to start surrendering to this process with more grace, and also what we see is possible thanks to the rising of the feminine. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I personally loved it, and I think that you will get a lot of value from it. So keep on listening as we dive right into it. Amy, thank you so much for making the time to be here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, such a pleasure. So let's dive right in. As I was sharing with you before we press recording, there is this topic that I feel we get to dive into together, which is the feminine rising and what it looks like, what it means, how do we respond to it? I want to hear all things, but to start, what does that even mean to you? You're a leader of the feminine rising. What is the feminine rising?
Yeah, so I first discovered this larger perspective of what's happening in the collective and what's happening in the world shortly after I started my own spiritual journey, had my own spiritual awakening, which was kind of around the time of, I was about 27 years old and was really seeking the answers to my own depression, struggling with anxiety, and was looking within to see where were there imbalances, what were some of the thoughts and the beliefs that I was having that were contributing to both chronic mental health and also chronic physical health issues that I was having. And as I dove deeper into my spiritual practice, I started to get these, I like to call them breadcrumbs, where we get these little pings and we get inspired to maybe search for something online or read a certain book or listen to a certain podcast. And it comes to you in the timing that it's meant to come to you. So I first learned about the feminine rising through an author that I really, really admire, and I consider her one of my teachers from afar. Her name is Rebecca Campbell, and she's a really, really beautiful teacher of this work around the feminine rising and the collective shift that's happening. So this element of the feminine rising, what does that mean? It means that we are going through a huge, huge shift on both a collective level and on an individual level. It means that we are in a time of great change, and that for many reasons, we are being asked to do things differently. So for the past century or more, we have been, as a society, operating from a more patriarchal system, a more masculine-based system. And many of the elements of the feminine that are so important for healing, individual healing, healing of the planet, of the earth, have been neglected, have been pushed aside, don't hold value in the perspective of our society. So in society, we really value things like materialism, capitalism, success, consumerism. And we also value the idea of doing and achieving and accomplishing. And many of us, specifically as women, have really conformed to fit into these societal ways of being as a as a method to subconsciously fit in, as a method to feel worthy, as a method to feel like we matter, or that we've achieved something, or that we have succeeded, and that we can be lovable because we've have all these accolades and accomplishments. And so while that may have served us in some ways, what we're starting to see or starting to become aware of, I think this has been happening for, far too long, decades, is the veil is being lifted, as we would say. We're having a collective awakening that these ways of operating are actually harmful. They're not supportive of the future that we want to create. And the feminine rising is really an awakening of these parts of the intuition, of the feminine wisdom, of the wisdom that our bodies have, and of creativity and pleasure and aliveness and sensuality, these elements of the feminine that have been shamed or at least devalued for a really, really long time. They're coming back online, and they are starting to be seen as valuable and starting to be necessary in order for us to move forward in a direction that's going to allow us to thrive. So in a kind of like a nutshell, I guess I could say that that's how I see what's happening. And the last piece that I'll share on that is that I see this happening at a very rapid rate. Consciousness is rising, consciousness is expanding. And the rate and the pace that people are waking up, men and women, to this understanding that the way that we've been operating is no longer working. I see this happening all around me in my social circles, in my business, and really seeing people starting to awaken. And while there's a large percentage of the Western world that is not awakened yet, the more of us that start to awaken, we can actually start to create a ripple effect and create a larger change through this method.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm been nodding. Yes. Absolutely. And I see this as so important. I remember reading the book Pussy years ago, and really starting to hear more and more about these matriarchal societies that we lived in before, and the differences of what was possible when we weren't living in the patriarchal way that we live now, or before we did. And I think it's not a matter of bringing back matriarchy in order to allow the feminine to rise, but really look for a harmonious way of living in relationship to everything. So I was actually just being interviewed in a podcast earlier, and I was talking about the concept of all of our relations. I walk what we call it the red path, and we speak a lot about my relations, all my relations. In the prayers, they say for me and all my relations. And there's this idea of being in right relationship with everything. So you're right. Really, are you in right relationship with yourself? Are you in right relationship with your friends, with your partner, with your community? Are you in right relationship with the earth? Are you in right relationship with animals? Are you in right relationship with everything and anything? The spirits of the land where you live, everything. And I feel it's so important. And this is such a crucial part of what's happening in this rising of the feminine. So we are not having to go into this matriarchal and now let's just women empowerment and men down. Like, I feel a lot of people have this fear that the rising of the feminine means the falling of the masculine, and that's absolutely not it. But it is bringing right relationship to all of our different environments and aspects and beings and people around us that we have forgotten how to be in right relationship with. And I'm curious to hear from your experience, what is one of the biggest things that gets in the way of women really saying yes to and accepting this rising of the feminine within themselves?
Yeah. So the first piece that I would say is that it takes time to deprogram and to unlearn these old ways of being, these old belief systems, these misunderstandings of that there is only one way to achieve success, or there is only one way to be in leadership. And these are really, really deep seated programs that we have absorbed in our psyches, in our subconscious mind, through observation, through religion, through our school systems, through science. We've been indoctrinated in these ways. And so part of it is just time, is really being with and becoming aware of and bringing to light some of these beliefs and ways of thinking, and creating a new mindset around them, understanding around them. I think 3 of the main patterns that I see for women specifically that make it hard for them to adapt to these new ways of being, or 3 blocks that they have to overcome and get through in order to be able to start operating in this new way. One is overcoming people pleasing, is letting go of the fear of what other people are going to think of you, and releasing the responsibility that you feel and that you think that you take on for other people. So I see a lot of women saying yes to the things that are really no's for them, of bending themselves backwards and contorting themselves and trying to do everything for the fear that they're going to disappoint or let other people down or be seen as someone who's selfish. And that is a old paradigm that is not serving us at all. So tied with people pleasing is also martyrdom, is this idea that we have to put everyone else first, that we can't nourish ourselves and take care of ourselves, that we have to be put last. Otherwise, again, we are seen as selfish or wrong or bad, and we're afraid of that judgment. And then the third one is perfectionism. This idea that we have to have it all put together. We have to have this pretty face and this perfect house and this everything organized, and nothing can be wrong. And we always have to be happy. Again, because of the desire to fit in, to be approved of, and to be accepted. And for a woman to truly embody her feminine leadership and to be part of the feminine rising, for her to really do that, she has to be willing to let go of what other people think. She has to be willing to honor her truth and respect her truth above all else. And that process is challenging. It can be painful. And part of that is being willing to be uncomfortable, being willing to be okay with someone not loving everything that you do, or someone close to you, like a friend or a family member, like being okay that things might change, that your relationships might not stay exactly the same. However, when we start living in our truth and when we start honoring our soul's guidance, we actually start to attract more like-minded people. We start to attract a tribe, a community of people who do get it. And also some of the people who you thought wouldn't understand it or who don't get it actually have a lot of respect for you. At least in my experience, I've seen that, really honoring my truth has allowed people in my family who may not have understood it, or who maybe just don't see the same perspective, to at least have a lot of respect for the journey and the path that I'm on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought that understanding that it might be uncomfortable at first, because oftentimes I feel, especially when it comes to feminine embodiment and feminine, all things feminine nowadays, you can go into so many Instagrams and see so many people that are speaking and sharing about this. However, I see a lack of groundedness in the overall understanding in our society of what it may look like to get there, right? Because it's not about sister circles and cacao ceremonies and affirmations. All these things are beautiful. And to really decolonize your mind, to really let go of the programs that tell you that you have to be perfect, that you're not safe to not be perfect, that you're not safe to put your needs first, that you're not safe to take up space. All of those are not going to just fly away when you decide to pull some angel cards or attend a couple of women's circles. And I feel like this is something that's really important to understand, because I meet a lot of women, a lot of my clients come to me thinking or saying, well, I thought it was just going to be easier. Like, I thought that, you know, I'm doing the things, I'm reading the books, I'm listening to the podcast. So why am I not there yet? Well, you're not there yet because there is a process of becoming undone. And this is important to understand. I actually have a mastermind called the Embodied Woman, and we go through a lot of these processes. And interestingly enough, I have women saying, oh, you know, when you speak about feminine embodiment or the embodied woman, I would have thought that there would be a lot more of the fluffy stuff in it. Well, my approach is really grounded, and it's really get to, you know, we're getting shit done, because this is how I see the change really happens. So I feel like really this misconception around what it looks like to be in the feminine and how the journey of raising in the feminine is, we must really understand that it's not like that. Like, it is going to be uncomfortable at times. At times it may look like you expressing your rage. At times it may look like understanding and realizing all the ways in which your wounded little girl wants to control and manipulate instead of surrender and be vulnerable. It looks like going through sisterhood wounds. Like, there is so much in there to unpack. And I love that you spoke about that, because I know that there's a lot of people still out there, a lot of women making themselves wrong because it doesn't look like on the Instagram videos where everyone's just wearing flowy dresses.
Yeah, or dancing and feeling in pleasure. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. This morning I had a message that came through that I think really kind of like captures a little bit about this journey that we're on. And what came through was, embodying your feminine is one of the most rebellious acts that you can take. It's revolutionary to say, hey, the ways that society is operating, the ways that I'm expected to show up, I'm no longer going to be that person. I'm no longer going to be that pushover. I'm no longer going to be a doormat. I'm no longer going to let people take advantage of my time. I'm no longer going to say yes just to please other people. Like, that is disrupting to your environment. That is disrupting to your relationships. And it does stir up so much and bring up so much to say, hey, I'm going to be a stand for doing things differently. And it is uncomfortable. Not, it might be uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have found as well that, especially with this feminine rising, there is, and I'm curious to hear if you've seen this as well, but there's also this masculine approach to the feminine rising that a lot of women, without realizing, and this has been me as well, can bring forth. So because we're so used to doing things in a masculine way, because we're so used to how things look in a masculine world, we, even when we approach the feminine journey and the feminine embodiment and the feminine rising, oftentimes I see women bring their masculine approach to this journey as well. And this might look like also this, what I see a lot is this level of masculinity in the journey of diving into the feminine. For example, being a stand for our boundaries, but those boundaries actually being emotional walls. Being a stand for our feminine power, but that feminine power actually being the wounded little girl not wanting to let people in, and not knowing how to surrender and be vulnerable and allow the masculine to hold us. Being a stand for our gifts and taking up space, but that actually coming from a space of wounded ego that is seeking approval and validation and all of that. So it's a beautiful dance, and really I'm interested to know what you've seen in regards to this.
Those are all such epic examples, and I totally see that. One of the places that I see it is in the way that women approach their rituals and their practices. So you can have daily rituals and practices that don't feel sacred because you're just going through the motions, or you start checking off the boxes exactly so that you've done your meditation and your journaling, and then you now have a whole list of things that you feel like you have to do and that they become should do. And we're just applying these masculine ways of operating to our spiritual practices, which completely defeats the purpose. And I've been guilty of this at times. And the way that I know that I'm falling into that is when I don't actually feel that connected to my practices. And so everything that you just shared are great examples of how this is an ongoing practice, and how we can continue the practice. And the journey is coming back to love, is coming back to truth, is coming back to when I notice that I'm operating in these ways of control or seeking validation or checking off the boxes, being aware of them and getting curious and having some compassion for yourself because you've been programmed this way, and taking a deep breath and being like, okay, if this doesn't feel in alignment, how can I come back to operating in a way that does feel true for me? And so what I invite my clients into, if they notice that they are getting into this more masculine structured way of doing things, is waking up in the morning and still having the masculine structure of, I have a morning routine or a morning ritual. I have space for my morning ritual every single morning, right? But what I do during that space can vary. It can be intuitive. So waking up in the morning, like this morning, my body needed some more rest. And I didn't feel like doing a silent meditation today, which sometimes feels really great for me. So instead, I decided to do a embodiment piece, like in my bed. I didn't even get out of bed. I put on some music. I listened to some music, and I just started stretching and breathing and moving. And I didn't go to this workout that I was going to go to. I listened to what my body needed. And so you can start to ask yourself these questions and tune into your intuition, like, what would have me feel most connected today? Based on how I'm feeling right now, based on what I have coming up for the day, what do I need right now? And trusting that if you're guided to do some journaling, if you're guided to listen to a podcast, if you're guided to do a meditation, that you're not doing it wrong because you don't have all these rules around it. Like, it's actually probably the most supportive practice for you today to listen to what you need. So those are some ways that we can work around that. But I definitely see ways that we can often default to the masculine programming and just apply it, like you said, to this new way of being.
Yeah, I love that you brought that example up, because I see this as one of the biggest things, and I've been guilty of that for sure in the past as well. Another thing that came to mind as you were mentioning that is that approach also to healing, to the healing journey. So I see this happens a lot as well, where the unhealthy, not the masculine, but the unhealthy masculine has many different traits. And one of them is constant fix-it energy. And we see this with the healing journey. So I get a lot of women that I work with saying, I should be over this. And why is this not working? And I teach this thing, or I coach this thing. So why is this coming up? And this level of judgment and thinking that something's wrong, so I got to fix it, gets in the way of the healing actually happening. So I always speak about, you can't heal a wound with the same energy that created it, right? And the majority of us that find ourselves in having controlling tendencies or perfectionism, overachieving, there's a little girl within that just didn't feel safe. So she made up this story. She had the misunderstanding that she had to overcompensate, and she learned to do it in all these different ways. Now, what that little girl needs in order for us to be able to stand in our healthy, embodied feminine is compassion, nourishment, time, acceptance, and the fixing it energy, the what's wrong with you, why are you feeling that way, why are you insecure, why are you fearful, is just not going to do it. So love that you brought this up. And I would also love to hear, what are some things that you see apart from what you just mentioned, can help women get started in this journey of allowing their inner feminine to truly rise?
Yeah, so the feminine rising as a whole, as a collective, starts with your own healing. It starts with you looking within. And again, it's not coming from, like you said, the place of healing because you feel like you need to fix something, or because you feel like you're broken, or because you feel like there's something wrong with you. It's really, the way that I like to look at it is coming from the lens of, how can I feel my best? How can I show up as my best self? What are the ways that I can nourish myself and take care of myself and be in a vibration to be able to then contribute and to give? When we are depleted, when we are not nourishing ourselves, when we're not taking care of ourselves, when we don't feel good, it's a lot harder to be in contribution. It's a lot harder to be present in our connections. It's a lot harder to enjoy our lives. And I really want to emphasize here, because I know the ways that women think, is that the goal of this is not to have a impossible standard or expectation that you're supposed to vibrate at this high frequency and be in alignment all the time. One of my teachers recently said, either you are in alignment or you're on the journey to getting back into alignment. And I think that takes the pressure away of it meaning that there's something wrong if you don't feel good all the time. So the way that I really would approach like connecting with the feminine is, what are the things that I need to do in order to experience more pleasure, in order to intentionally incorporate more play, more connection to nature, more time to be with my soul? Like, what are the elements for me or for you? It might look different. For someone, it might be playing an instrument and spending more time, with their creative gifts. For other people, it might be taking the time to lie in the grass and put your belly on the earth and just be there and breathe, right? We all need these different things. And what you need to feel good now might evolve and change over time in different chapters of your life. So really, if the focus can shift from fixing yourself and trying to figure out the formula of how to get into alignment, and if the focus can come back to, what do I need today? What do I need in my life? What can I intentionally do? It's not always about the doing, but what can I intentionally create my life by design, so that the primary focus and goal is for me to thrive, for me to feel good. And sometimes that looks like, what do I need to let go of? Where do I need to create more space in my life so that I can step into the woman that I'm becoming, so that I can implement these new habits or these new ways of being, and maybe surround myself with more people who are, inviting me forward into my next version of myself. So I think starting with, a great place to start is writing down, like, if you were showing up as your highest self, what would that look like and what would that feel like? What would your day look like? How would your relationships feel? How would you spend your time? What would you incorporate? And start there and start to connect with that feeling and that knowing of, yeah, this is what feels good to me. Because when you feel good, your frequency is higher, you're much more powerful of a manifester, and you can also be in contribution in a very beautiful, heart-centered way.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm curious to know, what are some of the things that have supported you the most in your journey to allowing your feminine to rise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I love this question. The thing that made the biggest difference in my life that completely transformed my mental health, that allowed me to connect to my soul, is meditation. So for me, my meditation journey has been so healing for me. It has been a cornerstone that has allowed me to become an observer of my thoughts and to be in relationship with my thoughts and my feelings in a new way. And it's also been an opportunity to slow down and to listen to myself. And so, yeah, meditation has been such a huge game changer for me. And more recently, embodiment. And the way that I've practiced embodiment, and I'm currently completing a 10-month certification process to really understand how to not only incorporate embodiment into my life, but then teach it. This specific style of embodiment is through a movement practice. And it's an intuitive feminine practice that is a guided process where we explore these different parts of our feminine pleasure and our power and our play through movement, through music, and getting out of the head. I find that a lot of personal development, including the journey that I've been on, I started very intellectually, and I like to understand how things work. And I love listening to podcasts and I loved reading books. And I actually don't do a lot of that anymore. A lot of my practice now is through the embodiment and through listening to what my body needs. And those are the two main methodologies, things that have really made the biggest difference on my journey.
I love that. Yes, meditation, it's been big for me as well. And embodiment is everything for sure. I always say as well that unless your nervous system feels ready to be it and to receive it, you won't be able to have it. And it's this understanding that, yes, the personal development world sometimes can focus a lot on the mindset work and leave the somatic and the embodiment pieces out. But in reality, unless our nervous system feels safe and capable of holding something, we're not really able to contain that energy, to contain that either way of being or that thing that we are wanting to attract, whether it's success, money, relationship, pleasure, all of it. So important. Absolutely. Okay, so just a few more questions. If you could put in a couple of sentences what you see is possible for the world as the feminine continues to rise, what are you excited about from this process?
I love this question. This feels like juicy and fun. And yeah, I see so much available. I see a lot of healing for the planet. I think this is one of the core elements that's been missing. Our individual connection to nature and our reverence for nature is going to shift and is shifting, and really, starting to respect and honor nature in a new way. So I think that's one piece. I see a lot of people returning to farming and returning to the land and really valuing land again. That's one piece I see. Another piece that I see possible is reconnecting with community. So instead of operating from our isolated ways or our individualistic ways, that is a very core principle of the Western world. I see a lot of younger, more conscious, people starting to engage more in community and collaboration and connection. So that's another place on a collective level that I see. And on a personal level, on an individual level, I see more living and less working. So I see people returning to the things that bring them pleasure and joy, spending more of their time outdoors, connecting, exploring music and dance, and again, being in nature and doing things that bring them pleasure, and less time behind our computers and our devices and this, this constant need to be working all of the time. Lastly, what I see is the way that money is distributed. And this is kind of like a much larger conversation around capitalism. But my vision and what I believe is possible, I believe that it will take time, but it is happening, is having more money in the hands of light workers, of healers, of teachers, of healthcare, nurses, people who are really on the ground doing important work. And I actually see this happening in kind of a twisted, weird way as artificial intelligence, AI, starts to take over. These services that are non-replaceable in a lot of ways are going to be rewarded financially. There's going to be a lot more value in those services. So those are some things that I dream about and that I foresee as possible, and that I wish for the world, that I want for the world.
I love that. And I'm right there with you with that vision, sister. Absolutely. And something that came up as you were sharing that is the memory of something that happened a few weeks ago for me. Well, I've been feeling this really strongly, of course, for years. It's been happening, and it's been happening for me internally. It's been happening in my work as I support my clients in this type of work as well. And I felt this urge of the collective really yearning for this. Like years ago, I could have thought that it would take a lot longer. Now, I kind of feel like it's already happened and we're just catching up to it. That's the feeling I get. It's like, well, there's not turning back. This is not will it happen? Will it not? It's happening. The feminine is rising, and it's rising within us all. It's not a matter of women rising. This is not feminism. It's a matter of the feminine essence and the feminine traits, the healthy feminine values rising collectively amongst us all. And I had this moment where just recently I felt this calling to buy land, and I had known for a really long time, but I wasn't quite ready. I wasn't sure. Australia is getting pretty crazy, the way they're living with the whole virus situation. It's like, let's leave that conversation for another time. But I was like, I'm not sure if I want to live in this country, just seeing how things are going. And I recently felt this calling of like, actually, I'm going to buy land. And I had this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful moment where I had a conversation with the earth. And it was this moment of reverence, of being I can't buy you. I can't own you. But it's not about buying land. It's about signing the acceptance of the honor and responsibility that it is to become the custodian of a piece of you. And just the different energetics in that, of going from I'm buying land to actually I am accepting the honor and responsibility that it is to take care of a piece of the earth and be my designated piece that I get to take care of. And I was sharing with the earth, like, I'm going to continue to check in. What minerals do you need? What plants do you want me to plant? What things do you want to happen in here? And it got me thinking, and like, wow, this is not just me. This is so many of us that are feeling this calling, are feeling this urge within to return to the natural ways. And as I was sharing at the start of this episode, I see it returning to having right relations with everything and everyone around us. And it's so exciting. It's so beautiful to see how so many of us are ready to put aside our own individual fears, insecurities, woundings that we still get to tend to and we still get to work on, but really stand up to be a steward for society and for humanity and for the earth in a whole new way. So I'm really excited for the work you're doing and how you are supporting women to rise and to allow the feminine to rise within them. So from my heart, just thank you for the work that you're doing. And I would love to hear, how can people find you and in what ways can people work with you?
Thank you so much for having me. This conversation feels super aligned, and just so many things have fallen into place that allowed us to have this conversation today. I know that we had like rescheduled for different reasons, and I really believe that this conversation was truly meant to happen today. So thank you so much for creating the space for me to share about my mission and my thoughts and beliefs. And I really, really appreciate the space. So the best place to start is through my podcast called the Feminine Frequency Podcast. And I just had Sigrid on as a guest as well. So you'll get to hear her beautiful interview there. Outside of the Feminine Frequency Podcast, you can find me on Instagram at Amy Natalie Co. And I work with women in a few different capacities. I have a 6-week feminine frequency journey, which is really starting to what we talked about today, really embodying these feminine principles and ways of being. I also work with women in a 6-month capacity in my Empowered Feminine Mentorship, which is a one-on-one journey. And then in my Empowered Feminine Experience, which is a group 6-month journey as well. So many different capacities. And at the very least, if you want to reach out and send me a message after you listen to this, let me know what resonated for you. I would love to hear from you based on where you're at on your journey. And yeah, I would just love to have you in my community.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, in your opinion, what makes a leader sacred?
I believe the word sacred in itself is really connecting to a higher power. So when we're leading from a heart-centered place and a place where we are aligned with divinity or with God and working with, these forces beyond us, versus when leadership comes from the ego or from the self-benefit, which I think as a human, we're always going to be in that conversation with ourselves of coming back to the type of leadership that comes from the heart. So that's what I believe, creates sacred leadership, and someone who is really on the journey and in the practice of coming back to the truth and realigning with the divine and with the universe.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. And yeah, I'm excited to share this conversation with everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this video and got lots of value from it. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for many more value-packed free videos, and share this with anyone in your life who can also get value from it. If you want to get access to all of my free resources and connect, check out the links in the caption. Thank you again, and I will see you on the next video.